Planning Committee meeting, and to those members of the public who are watching online. I'm Clive Hooker, Chairman of this committee. The members joining me this evening are Councillors Adrian Abbs, Dennis Bennyworth, Phil Barnett, Jeff Beck, Jeff Cant, Caroline Culver, Howard Wollaston, and Tony Vickers, our Vice Chairman. I think I've captured everyone there. The officers attending and presenting the applications to the committee are our planning officers Simon Till, Cheyenne Kirby, and Nico Grigolopoulos. Our highways engineer is Paul Goddard, and we're joined this evening by Sarah Clark, who will give us our legal advice. Ben Ryan will be the clerk. I'm also assisted by Lizzie Rees, who will be the Zoom host. Before we start the meeting, I'd like to explain for the benefit of those watching that this is being held both via Zoom and with councillors present here in the council chamber. The meeting is also being live streamed on YouTube. Please can I ask everyone present in the meeting area to make sure they switch on their microphones when they're invited to speak and to speak directly into them, and to switch them off when they've finished. Can I also ask everyone to put your mobile phones on silent, or even better, turn them off? And also, members, if you turn the volumes down and off on your laptops, should you have them on. Regarding the safety of this meeting, if we hear the fire alarm, we must leave the building immediately. Please leave via the emergency exit routes, which will be shown to us by the officers present. Please follow any instructions given by them. The assembly point is the Dolphin car park just outside the main entrance. If the lockdown alarm sounds, we will remain seated and await instructions from the officers. I will then adjourn the meeting and until such time as it's safe to proceed again. To be consistent with our council meetings, I'd like to remind members that we are subject to the council's code of conduct, which requires us to uphold certain standards, those being respectful to each other, to officers and members of the public present. Members may not always agree with one another or the officers' recommendations, but I ask that we are always respectful to one another's views and opinions. So now we'll move on to our agenda, and item 1 on the agenda are apologies. Mr. Ryan, do we have any apologies, please?
We have no apologies, Chairman.
Thank you. We move on to item 2. Which is the approval of the minutes. That's the meeting that we held on the 28th of February. Members, any observations, please? Councillor Beck. Thank you. Councillor Culver first.
Thank you,
Before
Chairman.
I do that.
Yeah, just on page, beg your pardon, page 7. I just wanted to put on the record, we've mentioned about the Section 106 agreement for Compton Institute, and my understanding was that I was going to be shown that document the following day, but I haven't yet seen that. So that was just one thing I'd like to put on the record, if possible, please. And I've got one other comment on page 34, if I may. Point 64 on page 34 about the AONB having a second or subsequent opportunity to comment on the proposals, and I think the words before should actually be after. So the question was, did the AONB had a second opportunity to comment after it was proposed cutting down some trees? Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Culver. With those amendments to be done at a later time, do I have a seconder, please? We do. Councillor Abbs. All those in favour, will you please raise your hands? Those minutes are approved and I will sign them.
Chairman, I abstain because I wasn't present.
Thank you. Thank you. 2 abstentions. Thank you, Councillor Wollaston and Councillor Bennyworth. Thank you for pointing that out for the record. Members, will now move on to item 3 of the agenda, which is declarations of interest. Declarations of interest, members. No declarations of interest. Nobody's been lobbied. Good. Thank you very much. We move on swiftly to item 4, which is the planning applications before the committee this evening. And we just have the one. This is the application at Dearborn in Inkpen. That's application number 22/0 1901. This is a major full application. And just as a point of introduction for those people attending in person or watching online and unfamiliar with the meeting's format, I will briefly outline the process of this application this evening. The officers will present the application to the committee. The drawings, site plans and any relevant material submitted on the planning file will be shown as part of their presentation on the screens here in the chamber and on your screens at home. I will then invite the representatives from the following groups to come up to the pedestal here in front, or I will ask Ms. Reeves to invite them into the meeting on Zoom to present their case to the committee. Each group will have a total of 5 minutes to speak. The order of the presentations will be, as I call them, firstly, the Parish Council, secondly, any objectors, then the supporters, and then the applicant and agent. On conclusion of each of those submissions, I will ask the members of the committee if they have any questions of clarification on those submissions. Members of the committee will not be permitted to introduce new material in their questions to the presenter. I will then invite the ward member to speak. They will also have 5 minutes to present their case. Members may then, on conclusion of that presentation, ask any questions of that ward member. The committee will then have the opportunity to ask questions of the officers' presentations. The committee will then debate the application and vote on a decision. So that's the process that we'll be working to tonight. So we go on to our first application this evening. This is application 20/010901 at Dearborn, Inkpen.
Thank you, Chairman. Just before we begin, can I please ask all members or issue a reminder for members to turn on their microphones when speaking, because I've just been advised that some of the comments haven't been picked up on the live stream because the microphones haven't been on. So just a reminder to members, please.
I'll just check that mine's on. I'm doing all right so far. Thank you. So we have the first application this evening, and I will ask Ms. Kirby to present this application. Ms. Kirby, when you're ready. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Chairman. This application is for Dearborn in Inkpen, previously known as New Mill. The proposal is for retention and alteration of a swimming pool building to include internal and external alterations, as well as the enlargement of the plant room, laundry room, entrance hall and sunken courtyard, retention of 2 external stair structures to the sunken courtyard, retention of tennis court enclosure, retention of repaired wall around the wall garden, as well as the barbecue and pergola within it, and the lean-to on its northeastern side, removal of temporary boiler building and erection of a permanent replacement single-story boiler building within the garden wall, retention of underground gas tanks and pipes, reinstatement of construction compound hardstanding area back into field, and provision of reinforced grass track from the existing driveway to the underground gas tanks, and reinstatement of previously removed western boundary hedgerow. This has been brought to committee as we've received over 10 letters of objection. In total, we've received 20 letters of objection. The 3 main relevant history, however, there is a full history in the agenda pack, is 18/0119 Full House, which is for the 2-story extension to the main house, pool house, a lake house and a boat house. And then we have the discharge of conditions application, which relates to spoiled tree protection and ecology. I'm going to split it up into sections just so it's a bit easier because it's quite a long proposal. On the screen, we have the location plan from the area. The applicant owns all of everything in the blue line. However, we're only considering the items in the red, which include the access to the north. And on the screen here, we have a site plan. However, I will specify which section we're looking at. On the screen, we have the approved site plan from the 2018 application, including the access road and the underground swimming pool. And this was the approved floor plan of the swimming pool. This was the superseded site plan. So following concerns raised by neighbouring dwellings regarding ongoing sheet piling works for the access ramp that was previously approved, that's in red, this element was removed due to complaints received about the sheet piling and the noise volume and the issues that causes. This was voluntarily removed by the applicant, and amended plans were received on the 24th of October, which removes the ramp and remains as is as a sunken courtyard. So the first element is the retention and alteration of the swimming pool building to include internal and external alterations, as well as the enlargement of the plant room, laundry room, entrance hall, and sunken courtyard. The underground pool building was approved under previous application. However, changes were made during construction, which this application seeks to regularize. The majority of the plan changes proposed to be retained are reorganizations of the room underneath the walled garden. These are not visible from anywhere on the site surrounding and result from the enlargement total of internal area of underground rooms by approximately 10%. This is for increased plant provision. However, some of the windows from the approved design were not constructed, and therefore this application also seeks approval for as constructed.
Ms. Kirby, does your mouse work on the screen? You might just do a circular movement if you can of the 10% and the increased bit,
Yes,
so other people can
That's-
might not be quite familiar with reading
Yeah.
drawings. Thank you.
that's fine. So the previously approved floor plan is the red. If you can see that online, which is this sort of area. So this area to the right-hand side of the screen, that's all been removed, and the sunken courtyard has been extended for the plant rooms. So we have some of the elevational changes. This is the main elevation that's seen from the north. Again, some of the windows were not constructed. However, majority of the plan changes proposed to be retained are internal and again, not visible. The rooms that are visible from the principal elevation are unchanged in size from the original permission. One of the main changes was to remove the removal of the stepped access and glass link into the walled garden, which is situated on the roof. So you can see on this plan here. Instead, two external staircases were constructed into the widened sunken courtyard to the west. Yeah, so to the left of the screen, we have a staircase to the north and a staircase to the south. These were constructed. And this area here was originally going to be the ramp that goes to the west. However, it's now proposed to be retained as just a courtyard. So the roof lights in the grass roof of the building are reduced in size and number, and the material finish of the rounded roofs are proposed to be amended from gravel to single ply membrane. There's also a slight level change is proposed within the walled garden to allow for increased depth of soil for planting of fruit trees. These are over the proposed underground rooms to maintain similar planting within the walled garden. So that's within this bottom area out here. That will be the level changes within the walled garden.
Thank you.
The retention of, so the second item on the proposal is retention of two external stair structures to the sunken courtyard. That's these which I demonstrated here. The sunken courtyard to the west was widened and external staircases were constructed along with retaining walls, which were constructed with associated other works, including cladding of the pool building in timber mirroring the principal elevation. The retaining walls to the sunken courtyard are rubble stone topped with stone coping. Steel railings have been added for safety reasons, and planting pockets in the walls have been added to soften the retaining walls. The plant rooms are accessed from the sunken courtyard via painted timber doors, and the steel railings balustrade are 1.1 meters in height and screened via planting. The external staircases provide access to the sunken courtyard from the north and the south, as most of the works are below ground. So this is the images of the courtyard as currently built. The third item on the description is the retention of the tennis court enclosure. The retaining wall and the 2.75 meter high fencing to the tennis court is to be retained. These works are associated with the reconstructed tennis court, which relocated the previous tennis court just a few meters, which was in a similar location. It's been moved approximately 2 meters. These are the site photos showing the retaining walls and the mesh, the 2.75 mesh fencing. So the garden, there was retention and repairing of the walled garden. So the proposal includes retention of the and reconstruction of the walled garden to match the existing. These walls were taken down and rebuilt during construction of the swimming pool building due to instability. The north section of the garden wall was rebuilt as the existing garden wall and therefore has a similar appearance. On the plan shown on the screen, it's the yellow that has been rebuilt. This is the same height as was previously there. Item number 4 was the retention of was the barbecue and pergola building. This is already installed outdoor kitchen pergola, barbecue area with chimney. They're located within the walled garden. However, due to the site, due to the height, etc., they are full with outside general PD rights. The chimney is visible above the walled garden at approximately 500 millimeters. However, given the choice of materials and the positioning, it's not considered to have a large impact outside the walled garden. Item number 6 was the lean-to. This was a small timber lean-to building located to the northeast elevation of the existing walled garden. This is to house electrical plant required to run the development. The lean-to faces is modest in size and is smaller in height than the walled garden itself. It's been designed to be in keeping with these existing painted timber gardener's shed and which is already in use in the walled garden. The design consists of small brick plinth to match the brick of the walled garden with horizontal painted timber boarding and a tile roof. This has already been constructed on site. Then we have the removal of the temporary boiler building and erection of a permanent replacement single-story boiler building within the walled garden. The proposed boiler building is to replace the existing one and will be considered to be more in character with the rural setting of the application site. The building is required to house 2 boilers above ground, which heat and run the plant rooms, which supply both the pool building and the main dwelling. For safety reasons, the boilers have to be housed above ground, and the proposed boiler house is also located within the walled garden in order to reduce its visual impact on the surrounding area. The clay tile roof will be visible around 1.34 meters above the wall, with the red brick chimney visible another meter above the roof. On the screen now is the temporary boiler building and the pipe work for the proposed replacement boiler house. We then have the retention of the underground gas tanks and pipes, 6 4,600 litre underground gas tanks. They are retrospective and situated to the south of the site. These must be situated 3 meters away from any boundary, buildings and fixed sources. From the gas tank to the main dwelling is a 63 millimeter diameter underground gas supply pipe buried at a depth of 1 meter. The overall depth of the gas tanks underground is 1.95 meters, with only their 6 caps visible above the ground at around 0.2 meters in height, with gravel surrounding. So these are what the gas tanks currently look like. There'll also be provision of a reinforced grass track from the existing driveway to the underground gas tanks. The gas tanks will access via the public bridleway located to the west of the site. Yes, so if you look to the bottom right-hand side of the screen, there's an access there, and then this is a public right-of-way along to the south here. The applicant did submit details, and they do have right of access, vehicle right of access along the public right-of-way. The existing access point here will be to the west of the site, will be widened to allow for the turning for the tankers that are required to attend the gas tanks. This is due to be a small number of times throughout the year, approximately 3 to 4 times. However, to the southwest here of the site, the access track will be proposed to be a reinforced grass track, which allows for reduced soil compaction and the grass to grow over the route, concealing it visually within the meadow, but allowing a stable surface for the tanker to deliver safely to the underground gas tanks. There was a track further closer to the boundary along the west southwest here. However, because these trees have a tree preservation order, the track was advised to be moved further inwards in order to protect the root protection area. The item number 10 was reinstatement of the construction compound hard standing back into a field. This is currently located in this area. The existing field has been used as a compound for contractors and suppliers and is proposed to be returned to agricultural use, most of which has been done with a small amount remaining as a compound to aid the finishing off of the works at the application site. The current bund or mound of earth will cover the area located to the west, and the field will return to meadow. So on the screen, we have the bund that will move onto the area to the west. The construction compound on this photo to the left of the screen has now been removed. The last item was reinstatement of the previously removed western boundary hedgerow. The boundary between Dearborn and Bridle Path Cottage had been previously cleared to create a gap and a link in the boundary, both sites which are under the same ownership. However, the previously installed access track through Bridle Path Cottage paddock has now been removed, and the plan shows the gap between the two dwellings is to be reinstated with native hedgerow to restore the separation relationship of the two dwellings. This is, when we went on the committee site visit, this has already been carried out. However, will take a number of years to fully establish the hedgerow. Here, on the screen are just photos of the area that was currently used as a compound and is to be reinstated as meadow. This has now been removed and was not visible on site. And that's it, Chairman.
Thank you for that, Ms. Kirby. I'm sure there'll be some questions maybe for you later on. Now move on to Mr. Goddard, our highways engineer. Mr. Goddard, any observations regarding highways on this application, and in particular maybe anything on the content of the construction management plan? Thank you, Mr. Goddard.
Thank you, Chairman. All the construction activity and all the buildings that are subject to this planning application are quite some distance from the public highway. And therefore, for those, that the local highway authority raises no objection. But as the chairman has mentioned, some concern has been expressed by local people regarding construction traffic. And this has been looked at in some detail on this occasion and is secured by condition 3 of your main report. Now, the construction management plan dictates that all construction traffic, or most construction traffic, will go via the main entrance from the north via Pebble Hill. We are expecting about 3 or 4 transit van size vehicles per day for a period of 14 weeks. This is less than previous construction activity on the site. There may be occasions when, due to width restrictions on the main access, when a larger vehicle may need to visit the site, and that will need to enter the site via the bridleway, Ink Pen 44 to the south. This is mentioned in paragraph 6.32 of your main report, and when such an event happens, the CMS requires that local residents are liaised with and consulted. As mentioned by Ms. Kirby, the applicants, the site, do have rights of access over the bridleway to be able to use that as the occasional access. Going forward, when all the works are completed, the bridleway will be used perhaps at most a handful of times a year in order for the gas tanker to make deliveries. but we really are not expecting any more vehicle movements than that regarding large vehicles associated with the site using the bridleway. Therefore, on all of that basis, your highway officers raise a no objection. Your highway officers also have a preference that this planning application be approved, because the thrust of the planning application before you is to retain what is there. And obviously, if much of that isn't retained and demolition takes place, then that would then mean more construction traffic in clearance and demolition. And from a high-risk point of view, we would rather that did not take place. On that basis, Chairman, thank you very much.
Thank you, Mr. Goddard. Members, we now move on to the presentations of our attendees this evening. And the first up, as I mentioned earlier, is the Parish Council. At close of play yesterday afternoon, we had no submission of a Parish Council to speak from Inkpen. Members, at 8 o'clock this morning, a request came in from the clerk of Inkpen Parish Council for a Dr. David Thomas to speak. As I say, it was a late submission. There was no apology as to why of its lateness or any reason as to why it was late. Members, I'm sure, as you're aware, it is quite clear in paragraph 7.13.2, part 7 of the Constitution, that any person wishing to speak at a meeting, at an area planning meeting, must notify the council by 4 o'clock on the day prior to that meeting, of which I'm sure that Parish Council was aware of that condition. Now, to enable Dr. White to speak tonight, we need to suspend the standing orders for him to speak. And for that to happen, I need a proposer and a seconder, and then a vote will be taken as to by members of the committee as to whether you wish Dr. White to speak, Dr. Thomas to speak as a concession. So firstly, do I have a proposer? The proposal is what? Thank you. Do I have a second? I do. Councillor Bennyworth. Sorry, Councillor Abbs.
Yeah, no, the public will not have heard that because the speakers weren't used.
Can you not hear me?
We have been told time and time again to make sure we turn on our microphones when doing anything, and neither did. Could we please have the microphones on so it's on the record properly?
Who's not turned on? Oh, Councillor Beck, yeah. Councillor Beck, when you speak, I can't see whether your light is on or not. So can I
repeat, Chairman?
Please, if you would. Thank you, Councillor Abbs.
I would propose that this committee be allowed to hear the address by the parish representative.
Thank you. Do I have a second? Councillor Bennyworth. So all those in favour for the Dr. Thomas to speak, would you please raise your hands? Any against? And I abstain. So Dr. Thomas, you may come up. Thank you. And you have 5 minutes to speak.
Thank you very much.
I'll just get myself prepared here. When you're ready, I'll start the clock. So when you're ready.
Thank you for allowing me to speak. The reason for the delay is that I have medication, which makes it very difficult for me to get a timing for the day. Inkpen Parish Council object to this planning application, and that's noted. I think the following is a statement reflecting the impact that the development continues to make. I would also like to make the point that if anybody works out how much liquid gas is being used here by this site for 14 weeks, you might raise your eyebrows. Apart from the continuous and very real stress and anxiety that this development has caused residents over the past several years, and apart from the systematic, continual and prolific use of retrospective applications, which were intended to help those that make a genuine mistake, this has been used to avoid due process. Apart from these, there's been and continues to be a disregard for the environmental impact of this development. In June 2020, Councillor Cole said, they tell us they're interested in ecology, conservation, animals, etc. The best I can say is it did not appear to be borne out in what's been done on the site so far. This still seems to be the case. Given the time constraints here, let me just focus on one aspect of the application: the removal of temporary boiler building and erection of a permanent replacement single-story boiler building, and the retention of underground gas tanks. The UK government's national policy statement for energy outlines the government's aims and objectives regarding energy policy. The statement expresses the government's commitment to promoting the use of renewable energy sources such as wind, solar, biomass over non-renewable sources such as gas. The statement also requires that new energy infrastructure must take account of the potential impact on the environment. I can give you the link for that if you wish. The West Berkshire Council local plan states that, where possible, renewable energy sources such as biomass and ground source heat pumps should be used in preference to gas, which is non-renewable. Additionally, the plan sets out policies that restrict the development of new energy infrastructure in designated areas of outstanding natural beauty. This is on local plan adopted 2018_0, and the relevant section is on page 192. West Berkshire Council local plan also states that new energy infrastructure must not have adverse effects on the local environment or the character of the local area. This includes ensuring that a plant does not have a negative impact on local wildlife, minimizes local pollution and noise and light pollution. Additionally, the council's planning policies require that any application for new energy infrastructure must demonstrate that this development is necessary. My understanding is that this gas-powered boiler house is to enable a steam room, which is seldom used in this holiday home complex. A ground source heat pump system apparently cannot be used because it doesn't provide sufficiently high temperatures for the steam room. Kirby House in Inkpen uses biomass. Manor Farm in Inkpen uses ground source heat pump, as does West Court and other sites. Many
1
with-
minute, Dr.
Thank you.
Thomas.
Many with smaller houses and less land use air source heat pumps, all trying to do their bit for the environment, choosing to make a difference. The pollution that would be created by this non-eco gas-fired heating system used for domestic recreation would tell the public that if you can afford it, you don't need to worry about the environment or global warming. Lesser individuals will make that sacrifice for you. I'm sure that this isn't a message that West Berkshire wishes to convey. All of us have a vested interest in the well-being of our children and grandchildren. Thank you very much, Chairman.
Thank you very much, Dr. Thomas. If you just wait there a minute, we may have some questions. Members, have we any questions of Dr. Thomas? Yes, we do. Councillor Ryan.
Through you, Chairman. Dr. Thomas, excuse me if I didn't listen to you carefully, but there was a question I was going to raise later on tonight regarding gas. Was it in a liquefied form? And I wasn't quite certain. Did you actually say it was in liquefied form?
It is in liquefied form, I'm sure.
And I couldn't quite hear for here because we've got an air conditioner behind us.
understand,
And
yeah.
you can't hear that clear. Sorry.
Members, we do. Councillor Vickers, thank you.
Thank you very much, Dr. Thomas. You've brought in a subject which actually is not mentioned at all in our report, and I thank you for doing that because it's a subject close to many of our hearts, i.e. achieving zero carbon on all developments. I wasn't able to note down the reference to the current local plan, and I repeat that I believe there was a reference to the current local plan. Is that all right if I ask him to repeat that, Chairman? Because I think that's very important that we can't take account of the new local plan yet.
The local plan, sorry, it's on the website. It's local plan adopted 2018_0.pdf. And the relevant section is on page 192.
Okay, thank you very much.
Thank you.
Would you like confirmation from Mr. Till?
Well, I was going to question officers when it comes
I
to
just
that
whether
time.
that's the right plan. That's-
I just queried the 2018 because that wasn't our local plan, but it might have been a supplementary planning document or some other.
Okay, we'll cover that later. Thank you. Thank you, Dr. Thomas.
Thank you very much.
Just let you get seated. We now come on to our objectors, and this evening we have Mrs. Poynton. Mrs. Poynton, do come up to the lectern. Nice to see you here this evening. Thank you for coming along. I think the members will recognise you from the site meeting and your contribution then, and we look forward to your contribution now. When you're ready, you'll have 5 minutes. I'll give you 1 minute notification, and then I'll give you 20 seconds, I will say, and in conclusion. So you compose yourself when you're ready.
Okay.
We'll
Yes,
go.
can you hear me?
I can hear you.
Yes,
Yeah.
thank you. Thank you, Mr. Chairman. It was actually very helpful to attend the site visit on the 23rd of February and to be able to see the current state of work. So I'm very grateful for that. The work at New Mill or Dearborn has been going on for 5 years. The noise has been truly unbelievable on occasions, and it just isn't what you'd expect from a single family dwelling. That's my husband and I think I can say all of my neighbours along the Bridleway would like to see an end to the work. There are 3 points and requests I'd like to make. The first is concerning further work and therefore further noise. We've been assured that there's just 12 weeks more work. The site visit seemed to confirm that the work is coming to a close. And the council's obtained a management plan limiting working hours to Monday to Friday, which is great. However, we have had this sort of promise before over the last 5 years. So I would like to request that the council makes some sort of condition on the completion of the work, if that's possible. So that was my first point. The second point is that we live in an area of outstanding natural beauty. And I don't believe that the AONB has been respected fully during this project. And I'll give you an example. Back in 2018, Mr. and Mrs. Krishnan commissioned a tree survey in support of their application. One of the few areas which the survey noted as important habitat was the woodland and its understory of scrub and fallen trees between our house and Dearborn. That was area G44. It was an area that had been laid there undisturbed for over 30 years. It was naturally occurring native species. It was impenetrable and provided dense cover. As soon as the permission was granted, that area was cleared of all the undergrowth and the falling and decaying trees and plants, and many of the standing trees were removed. Some other non-native plants like bamboo and gunnera and a couple of conifers were put in instead. It was all part of the refashioning of the lake and tree management. So the tree survey ticked planning boxes, but then the habitat value in that area at least was pretty much ignored. So my second request is that it would be nice if that area would be allowed to go back to a more natural habitat. I don't know what the council can do to do that, but that's my request. The third point I'd like to make is about the retrospective planning, which I think is already been mentioned. This hasn't been a cheap development, so I'm quite sure that the professionals advising the Krishnans understood planning law and its regulation. Given the current application is predominantly retrospective, it looks like there's been a deliberate attempt to circumvent planning. That's how it seems to me anyway. Work's being carried out in secret and not disclosed to neighbours beforehand. This leaves residents completely exposed and it erodes trust. I don't believe that any of these retrospectives were really necessary. I think it could have been done beforehand. And it also sets a precedent for
1 minute, Mrs. Boynton.
Yes. Oh,
1 minute.
sorry. It also sets a precedent for other developers in the area because it suggests that you can just do what you want and you'll get away with it. Is there a condition that the council could set to avoid future retrospectives at Dearborn? So that's what I would like to say. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Just wait 1 minute. We might have some questions. Members, any questions from Mrs. Poynton? No, we don't have any questions. Thank you very much for your presentation. Thank you. We now move on to any supporters, and we don't have any supporters this evening. We move on now to the applicant and the agent. And this evening we have Mr. Krishnan, Mr. Katie and Mr. Martin. Gentlemen, if you'd like to come up to the lectern. And before we start, if you'd like to introduce yourselves so as we know who you are for the minutes. Now, you've seen the format. We'd like to introduce yourselves firstly.
Chair, thank you. Do we have 5 minutes each or 5 minutes?
5 minutes total.
Thank you very much.
Yeah.
Chair, my name is David Keys and I'm the agent.
Thank you. And obviously, Mr. Krishnan.
Mr. Krishnan is the applicant.
Thank you. And who will be doing the speaking? Both of you?
Both
or
of us.
Would you like any indication at halfway? Or
That would
you-
be very helpful, please.
Okay, and then
Thank
I'll give
very
you
much.
a notification at a minute. And then when I say in conclusion, that's about 10, 15 seconds. Okay.
Thank you.
So when you're ready, I'll start the clock. Thank you.
Thank you. I'm the agent for the current application, having been brought in to advise early in September 2021, following the refusal of the previous application a month earlier. Acknowledging the local unrest and instead of possibly pursuing a planning appeal, I recognise that there was significant scope to find a suitable compromise that would benefit all parties. The applicant was similarly keen to follow this approach, which would mean positively addressing all of the previous reasons for refusal in any future proposal and attempting to appease local residents. We sought pre-application advice in October 2021 and met with your officers on site in December. All of us accepted the need to find an amicable solution. The current application was submitted in August 2022 and has been amended on a number of occasions since then, notably in October 2022 with the removal of the proposed ramp, which was clearly causing concern locally. In addition, the construction management plan was submitted in January this year and refined over the following weeks to remove reference to the use of the bridleway for construction purposes. The postcode for the site has also been amended to refer to the main entrance rather than bridleway entrance. The proposals involve a series of retrospective works, some of which were genuinely thought not to require planning permission, and others which do require subsequent approval. In terms of future construction activity on the site, the proposals essentially only seek permission for a replacement boiler house within the wall garden and the laying of a reinforced grass track to the gas tanks, as well as making good and returning the compound field of agricultural use. I see there are a number of letters of objection, but we have tried to limit the exposure of neighbours to new works and to deal with complaints as they arise in a timely and constructive manner. I've personally spoken with neighbours and contacted them to let them know that the proposed ramp would no longer form part of their proposals. In a similar vein, we recognise that we're approaching the time when neighbours will be using their gardens, and the last thing we want is construction activity taking place nearby. For this reason, we are quite prepared to delay the outstanding construction works until September this year and will happily accept a planning condition to that effect. To sum up, we believe the retrospective works and those that are still to be built are entirely appropriate given the planning history on the site and relevant planning policy. There are no plans for any further works. We will employ considerate construction methods and hope this may start to heal the relationship with neighbours.
That's halfway.
Which has clearly soured over the last few years. Thank you.
Thank you, Chairman. Thank you for giving me the opportunity to speak. I've traveled a long way to be here. I flew in this morning from Hong Kong and I'm due to fly back tomorrow morning. I'm here in person because I believe this is an important meeting and I would like to share my perspectives on the events that have led us here. My wife and I went to university in Cambridge and spent 10 years living and working in London before shipping out to Hong Kong. We've always loved the countryside and spent several years renting a cottage down in Dorset. In 2012, we started looking for a place of our own. It took us 5 years to find this property. You've got to kiss a lot of frogs before you find your prince. And we loved it at first sight. Now, we've done plenty of construction renovation work in London and Hong Kong, but I'd be the first to admit that I didn't adequately appreciate the complexity of building in the countryside. specifically the importance of engaging with the local community and keeping them abreast of developments. The fault was clearly mine, but in my defense, COVID also played a major part. It was not only extended the construction timeline, but given the lockdowns in Hong Kong, it made it impossible for me to speak to people in person and explain what was going on. So here you have a situation where everyone was cooped up at home, construction was carrying on way longer than expected, and the frustration was continuing to build. For all the annoyance and aggravation caused, and specifically for not being able to be here in person to better manage the process, I'm truly sorry. Now, we see Hong Kong and Dearborn as our principal homes, and after the hustle and bustle of Hong Kong, we'd like to expose our children to the other dimension, to run around in nature and truly feel a part of it. And that involves living in harmony with the land and in peace with our neighbors.
1 minute.
We grow a lot of produce on the estate, and what we can't eat, we donate to the food bank. We've also signed up the land stewardship program with 3 fields now operating under the scheme. Our objective is to manage the estate responsibly, growing our own food, ensuring that we live in harmony with nature. But it's equally important for us to contribute to the community. We send flowers from the estate to the old folks home. Our cottages are donated for weekly stays for patients from the Royal Marsden. We've contributed generously to the construction of the local sports pavilion. And we do this not because we seek recognition, but because it genuinely gives us pleasure to do so. And we believe it's the right thing to do. Since the quarantine restrictions have been lifted, I've had a chance to speak with our neighbors. We've discussed various concessions that we can make. And I believe at the end of that meeting, we've come to an agreement on a way forward. Specifically, the concessions include limiting the use of the bridle path.
And in conclusion.
In conclusion, we don't expect to use the bridle path at all, or to the bare minimum required. And we will delay work till September. And ultimately, we just want to live here in peace with all of our neighbors, just get along. So, I would really appreciate it if you could approve the application, help us get on with our lives.
Thank you, Mr. Grisham, and thank you, Mr. Katie. Just wait 1 minute. We might have some questions, and we do. Councillor Culver first, then Councillor Abbs, and I'll come to Councillor Vickers. Thank you.
Thank you, Chairman. Thank you very much for coming along, gentlemen, this evening. Could you tell me, please, how many weeks a year you're in the property?
As much as possible. Now, in the UK, because I work in Hong Kong, I'm only allowed to be in the UK for 90 days before there are all sorts of tax implications. But honestly, if we had a choice, we'd be, 6 months of the year.
90 days is your.
90 days is about what we can do, yeah.
Thank you.
Thank you. Councillor Abbs.
Yeah, thank you. I've got a bit confused there between the two sets of numbers that you were giving out. So maybe you could just fill me in. David, you mentioned that you began advising in 2021 after refusal. Mr. Christensen, you mentioned COVID, which was 2020, or the majority of it. So when did the retrospective work actually begin? 2020, 2021? Was it before the refusal? I mean, can you give me the timeline, please, of when you started breaking the rules?
That's a fair point. And our objective was never
retrospective planning rules, so you broke the rules.
So the deviations in the pool building resulted because we took away the ramp. So that just necessitated us to extend the courtyard or extend the plant room within the courtyard slightly. So that was on that side. I think the biggest deviation was with the gas tanks. Now, the gas tanks are sited on the location of old oil tanks because the property used to be fueled with oil tankers, which was hideous and dirty and polluting. And so we thought we would move to a much more efficient source. We have looked extensively at ground source heat pumps, at solar, at biomass, and all of that would require trenching up a lot more of those fields, making them essentially unusable or minimally usable, and ultimately don't generate. It's just way too expensive, and it doesn't have the positive ecological impact that we expect it to. I think we're much better off having an efficient fuel source, which is gas, and then planting the estate and returning it to the reason why we bought it in the first place, which is for it to be a wonderful, productive estate that produces fruit, that produces nuts, where we can grow our own grain, and we already grow a lot of veg there. And that's the objective, and in terms of the woodlands have all been preserved. We've had tree surgeons come in to help us rehabilitate some of the trees, excuse me. It's like 2:00 in the morning for me. So all I'm trying to say is the deviation was in locating the gas tanks where the old oil tanks used to be, because the planning application was taking so long, we just needed to power the pool building. And so we put the gas tanks in there. In retrospect, we probably shouldn't have done that, but they were sited on the pre-existing site of the old oil tanks. And we felt that this would be just not a contentious issue at all. Again, at least that's what we were advised by the planning people and by the construction people.
So you're saying West Berkshire Planning advised you that it would
No,
be a problem?
our planning consultants, the
Oh,
people who
oh,
are
so-
advising us.
so
No,
David.
this is before David,
So before Dave.
before David, which is why.
So all this work was done in 2020, 2021.
Can I come in? In terms of,
please.
in terms of timeline, as I said, I came onto the scene in August, September 2021. When I first arrived on site, most of the works that are now on site had been undertaken.
But
Okay.
you also mentioned you came on after refusal of the planning commission.
Yes, but so what happened was, as I understand it, because I didn't submit the application that was refused,
No, I understand.
there was an application that was submitted that was an attempt to rectify some of the retrospective works that had already taken place. That application was refused.
Okay.
Okay, now something that happened after I came on was the relocation of the tennis court. So the tennis court was relocated after December 2021 when I came on board.
So the increased height of the fence on the tennis court is yours, your advice to make it 2.7 when it's supposed to be 2?
No, the advice that I gave was that planning permission is required for anything over 2 meters in height.
But it's already been built.
It has.
Okay,
Now,
we'll
look,
get there.
if you're asking me, did I advise the client to, in your words, break planning law? The answer is no.
Thank you.
Okay. So
We
Mr.
don't want to get
Christian
into any
decided to do it all
discussion.
by himself.
Councillor Abbots, do you have another question?
No, I
Thank you.
think that's a little.
Councillor Vickers.
Thank you, Chairman. I think the hook I hang my question on, because it's supposed to be relevant to what the speaker has
This is
said.
where I say be careful, councillor Vickers.
Yes. Harmony with nature. That really depends on the planet being capable of supporting nature. So my question is really as much, if not more, relating to the previous speaker than to yours. And maybe your planning advisor might be better answering, but it is true that what has been built has involved an awful lot of carbon emissions in the process of construction. And I think that's what the parish council was pointing out to. Now, I'm really pleased that you like living here. I also lived in Hong Kong, and I can understand why coming to West Berkshire is a great move. I'm sorry you can't be here more often, but I would like to understand how you feel. You've heard what the parish council said. What would your response be to the amount of the high carbon footprint that not only has taken place, but will continue in the future? How can you offset that, shall we say?
Yes, so that's a very good point. And so specifically in terms of carbon offsets, part of the reason why we've subscribed to the stewardship program is we expect to carbon capture through greening the land and through growing fruits, growing more trees, and actually growing more growing grain, which will all capture carbon. But more specifically, any construction activity emits carbon. We, through our philanthropic work, we support substantial carbon capture research at Cambridge. We're on the board of the university. We do a lot of work on ecology. My wife's doing a lot of work with the Banter Trust. So look, this is an area of focus for us. And so to have us being accused of being negligent in the environment, it really hurts the quick in many ways, because that is absolutely antithetical to our DNA. But also then specifically, look, the choice of gas, I think, is the most efficient choice. We looked at solar extensively. I would ordinarily have wanted to be completely off grid, and all of us have paid our gas bills. I mean, if we knew what gas prices were going to be 2 years ago, trust me, I'd have been on a bicycle pedaling generating power to generate power. So, but it is the most efficient way, and all we can do is work to offset that with other means, so carbon capture and more greening. And I
Thank you.
also
That's fine.
Yeah.
I
just wondered
I
if-
think you've answered the question.
A
Councillor Vickers.
supplementary would be maybe
you
for
would, yeah.
your advisor, David, would you hazard a guess at the sort of carbon offsetting that will be needed for this? I mean, is this going to be a serious problem? Has what your client has said in any way, do you think, well, you'll judge by the vote at the end whether it satisfies us, but what can you say as a professional planner?
Councillor, as a professional planner, I'll have to say I really don't know.
That's a fair answer. I wouldn't expect you to at this point. Councillor Bennyworth.
Yeah, I think you could.
Thank you. Is the light on? I think we need a change of microphone, please.
Is working? Okay, you can have that back, Jeff. Thank you. Thank you, Chairman. Gentlemen, thank you for your presentation. Some sympathy with Councillor Abbs. The retrospective nature of this application is rather like development by 1,000 cuts in some ways. You mentioned in your presentation concessions to residents. What might those concessions be, please?
I think specifically people have expressed concern on two dimensions. One is the use of the bridle path, which we have tried to address with the construction management plan. So we will primarily come down the access route from off Kinbury Road, which is on the other side of the estate, away from the bridle path. And I expect that to be used 99.9% of the time. I can't say it's 100% because I just don't know if something may change, but that's the objective. And secondly, in terms of timing, look, I get it. You know, we live there too. And so we're not trying to be these horrible disruptive people from Hong Kong, which just sort of rock up and ruin everyone's lives. That's not what we're trying to do. We would like to live here for a very long time. And frankly, we're younger than most of the other residents, so we hope to be there for much longer. You know, and so if people don't want us to build during the summer, even though it's just a small structure within the walled garden, absolutely. Yeah, we can start in September. I mean, there's no problem. I mean, we've lived with a temporary structure for a long time. If we had to live with another 10 years, that'd be okay too. It's hideous, and I would like to get it rectified. And in terms of the normalization of the plan, yes, it make it in, you know, when they itemize everything like that, it sounds like death by 1,000 cuts. But the reality is the deviations are extremely minuscule, you know, in the grand scheme of things. You know, the pool building, yes, you know, some of the internal, you know, instead of making one room a bathroom, we made it a, you know, bedroom, and, you know, just little things like that. And there's been a little bit of extension in the plant room space, only because it was supposed to be a track, and now it's not a track, and now we have this great big courtyard that we're sort of stuck with, and we're trying to make the best use of it because it is stranded space now, and that's what has caused the deviations, to the best of my understanding. But maybe David, you want?
Councillor, I'll just add one more thing. Clearly, the removal of the ramp halfway through the application determination is another factor in terms of looking at what neighbours were saying and reacting to it. So not only are we not constructing the ramp, we're not using it either.
Okay, thank you. Chairman, if I may, one follow-up. We heard, didn't we, that there was something in the region of 12 weeks left of construction. Is that an achievable aim, or is that subject to some slippage?
The construction management plan has been put together by a construction company who is aware of the outstanding elements that need to be constructed. So I would have great stall in that, yes.
Thank you. Thank you, Chairman. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor.
We're going to stop paying them in 12 weeks. So that's sort of the forcing function.
Thank you. Councillor Barnett.
It's on the subject of concessions and consideration to neighbours, which of course I think you stressed quite considerably in your presentation. Again, I find.
Councillor Barnett, could you speak into your microphone just so those watching on the Zoom?
I like to speak close so you can see I'm actually speaking to you, but apologies if you can't hear me. In relationship to the objector made it quite clear she had to endure 5 years of noise. Now, I don't obviously know what the interpretation of noise means, but have you tried to endeavour to make sure that there's less noise as possible in the surrounding area in the work that's been carried out up to this point?
So, I mean, respectfully, I would say 5 years it's a bit of an exaggeration because we only bought the property in 2017. We applied for planning in 2018. I think construction started in 2019. That being said, I think the noise during the initial phases was awful. And by all accounts, I have every sympathy for all our neighbors. It was just awful, and there's no sugarcoating that. That being said, I think we've now endeavored to do everything we can to keep the noise and the disruption to an absolute minimum. This boiler room that is due to be constructed it's a brick structure, so they're laying bricks. I don't expect that to be noisy, and all the work happens inside the walled garden. And look, honestly, at this point, our neighbors have us on a hotline. So if it's noisy, they can just call us and, we will make the necessary changes. And we've done that on occasion. And we hope to, be a little more responsive, I think, going forward. Now that I'm here and, and better able to sort of supervise this as well. So yes, absolutely. Our intention is to keep noise to a minimum.
Councillor Abbs.
Yeah, thank you very much. Just returning to one of the things that one of the objectors asked for, return of the natural habitat in the area that was destroyed. Are you open to doing that?
I am, but I walked through that natural habitat many times, and it's a swamp. I mean, you'd lose a dog in there. So, I mean, it's on our side of the fence. So, Patricia.
It's in your discretion, then, of course.
No, I get it, but we've preserved all of the natural habitat in the water meadow, which is on the other side of the estate. Just because it's safer there and people know what to expect. The thing was with this, it was just completely unstable. And so when we had our landscape people come and take a look at it, they said you can keep it, but you just don't know if someone gets caught, or it was very unsafe. So we've just tried to regularize that. I would very much like to do as little as possible to existing flora, the existing trees. There are a couple of trees on the estate that are not doing very well. We have to bring in the tree surgeon and try and get that fixed. But yeah, I mean, if the intention is not to destroy the land at all. And with this specific area, the reason why we did it was because it was unsafe or deemed unsafe. And then now that it's all been rehabilitated, we have quite a lot of planting that's coming up there and coming through. Some of it is native, some of it is not native. But it's meant to be a garden and aesthetic. And so I'm biased, but I think it's beautiful.
So no.
Sorry?
So no.
No, I mean, it depends on what they want. If we're not doing any more work to it, so it will be over the next 15 or 20 years, it will probably revert to something that it looked like before.
You will maintain it in its current planting.
We will maintain its current form. Yes, that's right. Yeah.
I think what I would say though is that it will naturally rewild itself. There isn't any manicuring going on. There's no lawn cutting or anything like that. It's left to its own devices, and it will therefore rewild.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Abbs. Any more questions? Mr. Keaty, you mentioned in your presentation that you would be quite happy, or you would seriously consider a start date in September. What happens after all the representatives have spoken? We get into debate. As a part of that debate, we'll be looking at possibly conditions before we take it to a vote. Could it be taken that as a part of the possible condition of a modification to the construction management plan, that the date or the time of September 2023 is added for the benefit of the neighbours, that would be the earliest start date? Is that a concession? I thought I heard you said, so as we can go into that discussion confident that maybe that's we want to work together on this if that is the case.
Councillor, that's exactly right. We would not start until in September. Now, whether that is or necessitates an amendment to the construction management plan or is a separate planning condition, either is acceptable to ourselves.
Thank you. And 12 weeks will take you to the end of November, and you've given that consideration that possible rain and most of your work is earthworks, moving bunds and one thing. You're quite happy. We're not going to come back and say it's too wet. I can't do it in the time period.
I think there will be all manner of things presented to make sure that the works are undertaken within the 12 weeks.
Thank you. Members, any more questions? No. Gentlemen, thank you very much for your presentation, and thank you for the way you've answered the questions that have been put to you by the committee this evening. Thank you very much. Lastly, we have our ward member, Councillor Cole. Councillor Cole, you know the format. I don't need to remind you.
I've been here before.
You have my 5 minutes, Councillor.
Thank you, Chairman. Evening, members. Those of you who were there at the site visit, and that includes Patricia Poyton, who was speaking earlier, remember that before we started our tour of the site, I said I felt that things had changed between the applicants and their neighbours. And in the end, I said something to the effect of feeling that the tour had borne out what I said at the beginning. We are here because there were a large number of objections. There were a large number of objections, in my view, because of the way the previous agent, previous site management had handled the previous building works. This comment does not cover anyone here present. We kicked off with a 100-foot tower crane. It was reduced, I think, to 80 foot, but if you were living next door, it still looked massive. It's as if it was towering over you. The noise was awful, at least some of the time. Some neighbours may say it was all the time, and I might call that an exaggeration, but it was bad. There were a lot of planning applications. I don't have a list of the applications as such, but I was sent a list of the things that were done. So I can tell you, if anybody wants to get a feel for the past noise, there have been times when the bridle path became very heavily used. That's been judged not illegal as such. I've seen the documents myself, but it is a place meant mainly for walkers and horses. Yes, the applicant's family are Hong Kong based. As I've said before, I have long maintained that much, perhaps all of this, was because the applicant was badly advised. So it was changed. Firstly, our planning officers. Nico and Cheyenne have taken this project on and made sense of it, and I congratulate them. Secondly, the applicant, as you heard, took the bull by the horns when here over Christmas and talked to the neighbours to try to come to an accommodation to get this thing finished. This time, we have a construction management plan, sets out how things would be done. We accept that the biggest issue has been noise. And we have an acceptance, as you just heard, that the building works can be restricted. I had actually hoped that the restriction would be between May and September. That was what was kind of agreed with the neighbours. If works are done and can be got out of the way in April, actually that'd make sense. But I leave that to you. I make no excuses about the retrospective nature of some of this application. And I make no excuse for the method of heating either. Though over 5 years, attitudes to that have changed. I do think it's a nice looking job, as I believe most of you, perhaps all of you who came last week were prepared to agree. For example, the rebuild and repair of the old wall of the walled garden does look good. The latest owners do look as if they want to look after the place. In the end, my view runs that everybody, the Christians, the neighbours, and our planners want to see this finished, one way or another. Promises have been made. There is much scepticism in the community because of the past actions. Well, this is not a great place to be, what has happened in the past, but as one of our predecessors, indeed my namesake, Hilary Cole, used to say, I don't really like the phrase, but it is appropriate, we are where we are. It's not perfect.
1 minute, councillor.
Nevertheless, the key is the noise. So if you do decide to go with planners' recommendations, it will certainly make the community much happier if you put that condition in that the works be restricted, whether it is between May and September or to not start until September, particularly given what the chairman said earlier about running into November, might actually be appropriate to put the restriction in for May to September. Thank you, Chairman.
Perfect timing, councillor. Any questions for councillor Cole? No. Thank you very much, councillor. You've been let off the hook. Right, members, we now come on to any questions of clarification from Ms Kirby's presentation. We do. Councillor Cant, Councillor Beck, Councillor Abs.
Thank you, Chair. There are two questions, Sharon, really, one of which is, I guess, simpler than the other. On page 45, the refused application in 2021, what elements of that refusal involved work that has actually commenced since that date, despite the refusal?
The 2021 application. is that-
Yes, I'm just interested in what parts of that actually commenced irrespective of the refusal.
I wasn't the previous case officer on that one. However, I think it was just the gas tanks and the boiler was meant to be in a different location, the Folly building. It was meant to be outside of the walled garden. However, the gas tanks and the pipe work and were the same as this current application and the tennis court. However, the internal track was refused.
And part two, I noticed that on page 43, the outline of the application itself, the word retention is used 5 times in a relatively short paragraph. Can I take it that each time the word retention is used, the implication is work has already completed or commenced?
Yes, that's correct.
Right, so most of that
Yes.
is retrospective application for consent. Okay, thank you.
Thank you, councillor Camp. Now move on, councillor Abbs.
Yeah, I don't think I speak for most of us. I'm sure we don't like the retrospective nature of anything. However, we are where we are, as someone just said. Given if we were minded to say no, to refuse this application, how would officers, or I would like to get officers' opinion of how we would defend that at appeal. Because one would assume it would go to appeal. Do we have a leg to stand on?
Councillor, you happy with this, Ms Kirby?
Yes, I mean, it'd be quite a difficult one in terms of we'd have to determine again what's been built, what was approved, and whether that would be and whether we could defend that in terms of the pool building is extending by approximately 10%. We've got removal of the ramp. We'd have to consider it all, which would be quite difficult. I don't know whether Nick has any further comment as he knows the site a bit better.
Thank you, Cyan, through you, Chair. In such a case, were there to be a refusal of the retrospective, in effect, elements of this, one would have to consider that there is also whether it is expedient to take action against it, because there is no point of refusing something when you know that it's retrospective without taking effective action. And I would suggest, because obviously we have offered you as officers our opinion as to the merits and impact of these proposed works as they have been carried out. In officers' view, the proposed works as they stand are acceptable. So there is an issue as to whether there would be expediency to take enforcement action against something, because when you take an enforcement action against a development that hasn't got planning permission, it's not just the reason for refusal, it's an additional step.
Well, may I ask the question in a slightly different way, because I'm not quite getting the edge to the answer I'm looking for. We're not allowed to look at the fact that it's retrospective is nothing that we can, in our minds, we're supposed to have a judge. We have to judge what's in front of us here and now. Judging what's here and now, is there anything that we can refuse? And what on earth would we?
I think we'll take this a bit as a debate and then see where we go with it. And
Well,
I
looking
don't
for
want
officers
to
to guide
preempt,
me, yes.
I wanna get, sway the discussion, the debate.
Okay,
on this
let
one.
me just ask one
by
final
advice.
way then, if I may, Chairman.
Yeah.
Is your decision to say we should approve this on a knife edge? You weren't quite sure, or are you dead certain that we should accept this, or is it knife edge, or are you sure we should approve it?
We carried out a planning balance.
Yeah.
And the planning balance of all the elements that comprise these proposals are to grant planning permission.
Okay.
But we gave you an assessment of each element as well, and each one element is, the answer for that is positive.
Okay. All right, thank you.
I think we can say that's the recommendation before us this evening from the officers. So anyway, Mr Till's okay. Councillor Beck next.
Thank you, Chairman. Could I ask, if I may, the presenting officer, just to actually satisfy my curiosity as much as anything, on page 51, 6.17, and she did actually mention this, is that for safety reasons, the boilers have to be housed above ground level. I've known many boiler rooms below ground level, which, God forbid, and this is gas, if there were to be an explosion, if it is below ground, it would actually contain the explosion much more so than if it was, above ground. So do we know the reason for this? Because clearly, had it been allowed to be placed below ground, the applicant might well have decided to put it below ground, which might be safer.
Mr. Grigopoulos.
We have been advised as part of this application that the gas, were there to be a leak of gas, it's
Yeah.
heavier and sinks.
I
And
understand.
as a result, were it to be below level and
Yeah, I know.
by the swimming pool, and somebody came in and turned the light on or something, and then it
Yeah,
could have caused,
I appreciate
that is the reason why that
Yeah.
is above ground level. That's how we understand it.
It's because it's gas, basically.
Yeah.
Thank you. Councillor Pennyworth.
Thank you very much, Chairman. Just wondering if committee was minded to approve this application. A 12-week window in order to get the works completed, is that something that, is that a reasonable amount of time? That's what I'm really looking at.
It's been put in the construction management statement, so the condition 3 states that there has to be built in accordance with the construction management statement. So if it's outside the 12 weeks, then they would need to come back in and have that discussion with us, because it would be conditioned.
It will be conditioned. Okay, thank you. Thank you, Chairman.
Thank you. Councillor Wollaston.
Thank you, Chairman. It seems to me that the biggest issue is probably the bridle path. Is there a way we can condition that the maximum number of movements is perhaps 6 or 8 in a year?
Unfortunately, we can't condition that. That's the use of the bridleway is already permitted under a separate public rights of way legislation, and unfortunately we can't condition that to be limited by vehicle use.
Thank you.
Okay, thank you.
Councillor Vickers.
Thank you, Chairman. I indicated I might be asking officers about what Dr. Thomas had said on behalf of the Parish Council, and I wondered if there was anything we can do as a condition or whatever to draw out some objective measure of how much carbon offsetting is possible under policy, and is there indeed? I mean, that policy document slightly puzzles me. I'm not sure what it is and whether it applies even.
Mr. Till.
Thank you, Chairman. Councillor Vickers, the policy that is actually in place at present regarding sustainable construction and energy efficiency is policy CS15, which is the 2012 core strategy policy. Now, in this respect, it does state that major development shall achieve the following minimum reductions in total CO2 and zero carbon from 2016. The difficulty here is that, first of all, there is a fallback position, which is a viable fallback position in officers' view, which does not require any additional measure to be taken. So in terms of seeking a condition, we would have to consider the reasonableness of that condition in respect of the fallback position as well. Your officer's advice is that the condition would be unreasonable and easily susceptible to challenge at appeal. The second part of your officer's advice is on the basis of the considerations in this case, because although this does state major residential development, it's really for a capture for new major residential developments, entirely new dwellings, rather than being directed towards what in this case is a householder planning application, but a major planning application only by virtue of the size and amount of land included in the site. The third aspect of my answer has to be in respect of the very difficult proposition of actually achieving any meaningful document to secure zero carbon mitigation, carbon offsetting mitigation in this case, because there is extremely limited national guidance on this, and you'll be aware from discussions around the local plan that this is a setback for all local authorities in terms of seeking zero carbon. So making that limited guidance apply in the case that is already somewhat left of field in terms of talking about how to achieve zero carbon from a development like this, in your office's view, would be extremely problematic. And again, I would have to refer back to the reasonableness of a condition seeking that.
Just to follow up on that, I mean, Councillor Ab touched on this. In effect, there is quite a lot of this development that is already consented, and therefore we're too late to impose conditions on something that's already consented. So in terms of the bit we're looking at now, would that also make it even more difficult to achieve, to distinguish between what we are conditioning of what is up for us to decide tonight and what is already there and too late to bother about?
Well, of course, you are being asked on the one hand to take in the entire matters that are already applied for, but on the other hand, you're quite correct that the fallback position does allow a substantial proportion of what's being applied for in this application.
I think that's helped. That's been very helpful, I think, to me in thinking through this. Thank you.
Councillor Beck.
Thank you, Chairman. The point which Councillor Wilson has raised was sort of asking as to whether this council could actually put a maximum number of crossings of the what's that?
Right away.
Yes. And the officers replied no. Now, in the previous application, which we approved the minutes of this evening, there we were able to restrict the number of aircraft movements. Now, the two things are inconsistent in my view.
I think if I cast my mind back, the movements on and off, not going to get down that discussion onto the airstrip. That wasn't a bridleway. That was the removal, if I remember.
It wasn't a bridleway, I accept that completely.
But this is a bridleway issue, which I think Ms. Kirby gave us an answer.
It's not able to impose a restriction on a brideway per se.
Yeah, thank you.
I can accept that if that is.
Councillor Barnett.
Yeah, I'm trying, Chairman, not to go down the bridleway too much, but the question was specifically about the tanker usage, the tanker weight and not the usage. There's various types of tankers that can be used to transport liquefied gas. And I don't know what tanker capacity is being used at the moment and what will be advocated in future, because there's some big ones around, but I don't know whether you would expect them down the bridleway.
I think Ms. Kirby's got an answer for this.
When we had discussions with this with the agents, they have made the gas company aware that they will be using a public bridleway, and if the tanker is over 2.6 meters in width, then they have to use the bridleway because the main driveway cannot take vehicles over 2.5 meters in width. And they have advised the gas company to use the smallest vehicle when possible. However, they are a third party, so we can't actually restrict which vehicles are used. However, they have specifically made them aware that it is a public bridleway, and we have added informatives onto on the recommended conditions to state that anyone visiting the site has to be made aware that they will be driving along a public right of way.
Thank you. And we did get some indication, didn't we, on usage and therefore the number of visits per year. Can you advise the committee on that again, please?
Yes, so they advised it would be around 3 times, no more ideally than 3 to 4 times a year. It depends on the amount of gas used, I suppose, like whether it's been a cold winter, etc., or items like that. But it should only be around the maximum 3 to 4 times a year.
Thank you. And do we know if the smaller vehicle is used, whether or not there'll be more visits, or are we confident that the smaller vehicle can fill up 7 tanks?
I don't know the answers to that, I'm afraid.
I didn't think you did.
No.
Councillor Culver.
Thank you very much, Chairman. The issue about the sustainability of having the gas on site has been covered, but are officers satisfied about the safety of having so much gas on site? Bearing in mind that the owner has said to us this evening that they're only there for 90 days a year, how do we make a decision about what is an acceptable number of and capacity of tanks to have? At what point would we say, hold on a minute, that's a lot of gas, that's a lot of tanks if you're only going to be there for 90 days a year? You know, what is the limit on that? How do we make that decision about what's reasonable and safe?
In terms of safety, as part of this application, we consulted the Health and Safety Executive, Building Control and Public Protection, to which they've all come back saying it's either not a big enough. So Health and Safety came back saying it's not enough gas for them to be overly concerned. Public Protection have come back saying that they raise no objections, however, it's ideally outside of their remit. Building Control do assess the gas tanks, and a certificate was submitted as part of the application. However, in terms of like the safety of the gas tanks, that's out of sort of planning's remits because that's covered under separate legislation. So my knowledge on that is quite limited. It's not anything that we cover. Obviously, it's quite a large structure, and the gas tanks do serve the house. I mean, I believe when we went on site, there was an estate manager who's there, I believe, pretty much all the time running the estate. So there are people there when obviously the applicant is not there himself.
Okay.
Thank you, Councillor. Councillor Abbs.
I have
yeah.
a second
Oh,
question. Sorry, Chairman.
Sorry,
Sorry,
Councillor.
Councillor Abbs. Yeah, it's just about are we satisfied that there is biodiversity net gain on the site? Because one of the objectors talked about the loss of some of the trees in the understory. I know there's a commitment in here to put extra trees in on the western boundary of the walled garden, and there's talk about having a meadow, which I assume will be wildflowers. Are officers able to comment on biodiversity net gain?
Yes, I did consult the ecologists as part of the application. However, I never received a response. Obviously, the fallback position is the 2018 application. So we can, if committee feels necessary, we could potentially look at a condition on this. However, obviously, we do have to consider that the fallback position did not, from the 2018 permission, didn't necessarily require biodiversity net gain, but it is something if committee want to look at that they can, if required. Don't know if Nico, do you have anything further to add on this?
All I want to say is that at the moment, the requirement is potentially for 1% of biodiversity net gain until the Environment Act requirement of 10% minimum comes into effect later on in the year. But there are a number of elements that provide some biodiversity net gain on site by reason of the additional planting, etc. But if the members wanted to request, for example, additional bird boxes and bat boxes, that can be put as a way of condition potentially and can enhance biodiversity net gain that could be achieved on site.
Thank you. You're quite happy now, Councillor Culver. Good. Councillor Abbs.
Yeah, thank you very much. CS15 for the moment, and we have all the right people in place. We've got the blue line, the red line, CS15. I am speaking to the microphone. No problem at all. We are CS15. We've got basically residential and we've got commercial. Now, my understanding is we had a reading done by a QC on CS15, which effectively said because the code for sustainable homes became defunct, the residential side of CS15 also kind of became defunct. And therefore, only if this has some commercial and where BREEAM would apply, should we be looking at CS15. So can I get confirmation that one, this is a residential development, because the blue line, it's a rather large area. So it might be all residential, but is it part of an agricultural development? Now, in other words, what am I looking at here?
private, agricultural, and therefore which part of CS15 actually applies.
Mr. Grypopoulos.
Thank you, through you, Chair. It is residential. It is part of, but CS15 still applies to the first part of CS15 does not apply where it relates to the Code of Sustainable Homes. But the second part of CS15 as to renewable energy can potentially apply. But as my colleague, Mr. Till, explained, was that this is in effect a major development only in respect of the site area as opposed to the use of 10 units or more. And it's in effect a householder development. Plus we have the fallback situation in this case. And in that respect, it does not, in my view, would be unreasonable to apply it.
We can't hang a refusal based on that. So, okay, thanks.
Thank you. Members, any more questions? Any questions of Mr. Goddard on highways or the construction management plan? No questions from Mr. Goddard. He'll be very upset about that. Right, members, we now move on and it's time for the debate. Who'd like to start the debate? Councillor Vickers, well done. Broke the ice.
Thank you, Chairman. We know this isn't the only site in this ward bought by a wealthy Hong Kong-based applicant and built in a manner that many people feel stretches planning law and process somewhat. I think West Woodhay is the other one, isn't it, Councillor Cole? But there we are. We're looking at this particular application. It does make me wonder, you know, we've got Blenheim Palace, we've got Highclere Castle, even closer. No climate emergency there, no problem. You know, there's you know, status to be gained, and one can understand people with money wanting to do this there. Now, though, it does make one uncomfortable when we are facing a climate emergency, as has been said by one of the speakers earlier, that this can be done. But we have what we saw, and it is a very high standard construction. It does enhance the area. It's not visible from anywhere outside the site, really. It was a real eye-opener to have that site visit. I'm really glad we did. It did occur to me during the discussion that when most of this work was going on, we weren't even allowed site visits because in COVID, we were instructed not to have them. It would have been almost impossible to really make a judgment on this development at that time. But clearly, I mean, I'm impressed by the applicant and his attitude. He clearly wants to contribute to the area, enjoy living here. And of course, you couldn't, even if you are wealthy, you can't really enjoy living somewhere where you know your neighbours are unhappy with what you've done. So we have an estate manager who is available all year round, even if the applicant isn't. But I think there's very little that I can see that we can go against officers' recommendations here, however uncomfortable we might be about the process. But I'm comfortable with the outcome, I have to say. Very comfortable with the quality of work. And I think that's all I got to say. Others may wish to propose, but it's too early, I think, to put a proposal.
Thank you for that opening observation. Right, we move on to Councillor Abbs.
Yeah, thank you. Obviously, I asked some straightforward questions because if there was a reason to refuse this, you know, a current reason, I may have hung my hat on it. I've not been able to hear any convincing evidence. So what I'm left with is, you know, a rather sad situation where the residents have been kind of abused for several years with the noise and so on, but a planning application that, as far as I can tell, we don't really have any way of saying no to. I would like to make a comment to Mr. Christensen, who I know is listening, and he talked about all the good things, and to make him aware that he is biodiversity net gain, you know, what he's talking about in the field. These are the minimum standards that are coming forward. And if his application had been coming forward after the new local plan had gone through, he wouldn't be getting permission in the same way that he's built to, because there's far more robustness. So I would just encourage him, as he's listening, to push as hard as he can in that direction, because he does have a lot of land that could be very useful towards a biodiversity net gain. And that's under his own purview. So whenever you need, I don't, given where I'm sitting, I don't see any reason, I can't find a reason to refuse, and therefore I'm quite happy to propose it goes forward with the conditions that we'd discussed, of course, which is restricting periods if May for 12 weeks maximum, starting in April but finishing within 12 weeks, or September start and finish within 12 weeks. So, sorry?
The point is not April, but September start, isn't it?
Well, no, to be honest, if it can be finished before summer, I'd be quite content myself, because there were two blocks of dates talked about at the beginning and at the end. And if it couldn't be done at the beginning, we'd shift to the end, because everybody would like to get that thing out the way, as far as I can tell. So if we can get it out of the way, albeit I don't mind either way, the condition can be discussed in detail, but we must have that condition. And anything, if the applicant wasn't willing to kind of let Mrs. Poynton's second point about returning natural habitat, he wants to keep it as landscape garden, that's fine, but hence my comment about please look at the rest of the land you have and to do something there. And as sooner or later, gas will be outlawed in terms of gas boilers, and the same way the oil boilers will be. So, there's talks about it being as early as 2025. Well, it won't be that, but it's within our lifetimes probably. So anyway, my contribution is I don't see how we can, so we might as well.
I've got a proposer, and Councillor Kant.
Thank you, Chair. I take aboard what my colleagues say about the development itself, but I must say that in the past, I recall we've been pretty tough on retrospective planning applications for works. I don't take our colleagues' point that enforcement's tricky as being a reason to grant retrospective consent. I think one of the reasons for refusing retrospective consent is an indication of our displeasure that development's gone ahead without the proper process being followed, and that seems to be quite extensive here. So I just want to record the fact that I'm very concerned that widely across this application, a lot of work, it does give the impression that all you've got to do is get on with it and do it, and we will ultimately potentially just grant planning consent. I'm very concerned about that, because in the past we haven't taken that view. We've taken the view that retrospective consent is very reluctantly given, and only if it's been a genuine mistake. And this is, to me, has been a pattern of deliberate construction against the run of play of planning consents.
Thank you, Councillor. Very relevant point. Councillor Bennyworth.
Thank you, Chairman. On that point, Councillor Kant's just raised, I've already said that I regret the retrospective nature of the works and looking on it as a bit of an affront to this committee, to be honest with you. But I am, however, pleased to hear that there appears to be dialogue between the applicant and nearby residents. And I too can be persuaded, possibly, if the conditions that Councillor Abbs mentioned a moment ago were met. I'll leave it to colleagues to give their views. Thank you.
Thank you. Councillor Culver.
Thank you, Chairman. Yeah, I mean, the issue about the gas tank, I just wonder, at what point would we say, hold on a minute, this is too much gas for people that are going to be there for 3 months a year? I mean, presumably the land agent who's on site is not going to be using the swimming pool and the steam room every day. So it just begs the question, how often are those gas tanks going to be used? And I'm going to go away after this meeting and educate myself about, how big a tank are people allowed to have before someone says, hold on a minute, what's going on here? It does seem like a ridiculous size. And just to echo what colleagues were saying earlier about the biodiversity net gain, if we can condition about bat boxes and probably owl boxes, I think on that sort of site, barn owl boxes would be particularly welcome. So if we could do that, I would welcome that. Thank you, Chairman.
Thank you. Have I got any more questions? Any more debate? We do. Thank you, Councillor Wollaston.
Thank you, Chairman. It's purely to say I'm more than happy to second the officer's recommendations, subject to the conditions we've been talking about.
Okay. Well, I think at this point, now that we've got councillor Abs.
Yeah, Chairman, just to say the conditions Councillor Culver mentioned, I would be happy to have included in the proposal.
Thank you. I'm just coming on now. The debate is finished. I'll draw a line on that. And if I could just ask now, Ms Kirby and Mrs Clark, just to collate maybe the conditions that we've discussed before we put this to the vote. So we've certainly got a condition there. Are we happy? There was some disagreement as to when work should start or finish. Can we go with, I think from the site meeting, and I'm speaking to the site manager, I think he was inclined for September rather than an April start. So, I mean, can I make that condition that construction starts the first, not before the 1st of September? Councillor Culver's issue with regards to, I don't know if you've got a number or how we determine one bat box, our box or whatever. So that's another condition. You might like to elaborate on that. We can't touch the bridle way. Issues of the gas, I don't think was answered by Miss Kirby as to whether it's even a planning issue. I mean, you've gone down the right routes as the Environmental Agency weren't concerned about the holding of gas. Am I right to say, Nico? Yeah. So I don't think we can do much on that. Can anybody else enlighten me of any more conditions apart from those that are laid out in our document, which are quite extensive? Councillor Camp.
I'm flying a kite slightly here, Chair, but is it possible to impose a condition that they will get, that the applicant, if we grant this, will guarantee there will be absolutely no variation from the consent granted without the consent of this committee?
I'll take advice from the officers how far we can go with that.
I want to make sure there's no further breach of,
or certainly no
more
filing.
retrospectives.
I don't think we can condition that. In terms of, we do have an approved plans condition that would ensure that anything that was built is in accordance with everything that was submitted. I don't think it'd be reasonable for a condition to put in no more retrospective planning applications can be applied in this case.
Well, I wasn't saying no more retrospective applicant. What I was saying was that the applicant and their agent will guarantee no further works beyond the scope of, in view of the history, no further works beyond what we grant here will commence without an application for variation.
I don't think we can consider that. I don't think it would meet the tests for conditions.
I think it'd be back in terms of enforcement and go around where we are again now. Councillor Abs.
Yeah, I was just going to use the word permitted rights, removal of permitted rights, which is the only thing that I've seen us do in the past.
They don't have much permitted rights because they are in the ONB, so they've got, that's why they're applying for the pergola as well, and they're obligated.
So there's nothing for us to remove that?
Not really.
Okay.
Any more observations? Mr. Till, we do. Councillor Culver.
Thank you, Chairman. Regarding the barn owl boxes and bat boxes, I think if we take the ecologist's advice on that, probably one barn owl box would probably be appropriate for a site that size, and then Gareth could probably advise on bats. Yeah, yeah. Thank you.
Yeah, just say, given comments made previously that the weather might not be too clement in the autumn, would it be better to say no construction between May and September 1st? So if they can move some earth around now, for example.
Yeah, that's got a thumbs up from Councillor Cole. Is that okay with the site agent? Site manager happy with that? Mr. Christian's happy with that? Yeah, we want to go together on this one. Any more observations or quite happy? Mr. Till, can you just take us through now what we've decided so we know what we're voting on? Thank you.
Thank you, Chairman. In respect of the construction condition, I have, Councillor Abs's original proposal, which was for April, either a commencement in April or a commencement in September. I also have the discussion that we've just had that the condition states that the commencement should exclude the time between the 1st of May and, the end of May, and the 1st of September. So, councillor Abs, would you like to clarify which of those you would prefer as part of your proposal?
Well, I think quick chat with Jeremy Clarkson, get Alan the builder, and then it's all done in 2 weeks, right? So, but no, what we're trying to say is please don't disturb the neighbours during this period of time. So the second is more appropriate than the initial recommendation.
Not to start until the 1st of September. And
That some work can begin, but it no works must be carried out between May the 1st and September.
We got there. Thank
Yeah.
you. And continue, Mr.
Okay, and in respect of the barn owl boxes and bat boxes, your officer's recommendation would be a condition that requires no further construction works to commence on site, or if you would prefer that the works hereby approved were not occupied or taken into use until a schedule of barn and bat owl boxes is provided together with details of the specification for those boxes and bird boxes.
Members, are we all happy with that? Jolly good. So we got there at the end. So the recommendation is to delegate to the service director and development and regulation to grant planning permission subject to the conditions stated on the agenda before us and those additional conditions identified and laid out before us by Mr. Till. And this is for application number 22/01900. This is a full major application at Deanborn at Inkpen. And this is for, and bear with me, the retention and alteration of a swimming pool building to include internal and external alterations, as well as the enlargement of the plant room, laundry room, entrance hall and sunken courtyard. The retention of 2 external stair structures to the sunken courtyard, the retention of a tennis court enclosure, the retention of repaired wall around the walled garden, as well as the barbecue and pergola within it, and lean-to onto the northeastern side. The removal of the temporary boiler building and erection of a permanent replacement single-storey boiler building within the walled garden. Retention of underground gas tanks and pipes, the reinstatement of construction compound hard standing area back into a field and provision of a reinforced grass track from the existing drive to the underground gas tanks. And also lastly, the reinstatement of previously removed western boundary hedgerow. That is the application. And I will now ask Mrs. Clark is calling my attention.
I think if we can just confirm that councillor Abs who proposed it, and I think it was councillor Wollaston who seconded it, are
Indeed.
confirmed
I do have
that
a
they are
proposer.
content with those 2 additional conditions as articulated by Mr. Till before we put this to the vote.
Yes, Chairman.
That was
Yes,
my
I
next
consent.
statement.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Thank you for reminding me. So we're all quite happy. I will ask now Mrs. Clark to conduct the vote.
Thank you. Can I ask members who are in favour of the proposal to please raise their hands? Thank you, Chairman. That appears to be unanimous. Thank you.
Thank you, members. Then therefore, this application is granted. And I wish you well with the completion of that works. And thank you for your sympathy going forward. And I hope the attendees this evening from Inkpen area and the neighbouring residents are reasonably happy with the hearing we've had tonight. And you go away somewhat happy. Thank you all very much for attending this evening. And with that, thank you all very much for your contribution. And I close the meeting at 8:23.